Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with the Illuminati, Part 2 by Manly P. Hall. Taken from Horizon, Journal of the Philosophical Research Society. Spring 1947, Volume 6, Number 4. Masonic Societies in 18th Century Europe. As the rise and fall of Bavarian Illuminism were closely associated with the condition existing within the large pattern of Continental Freemasonry, it is necessary to examine in some detail the separate parts of this confused picture. During the 18th century, a variety of private societies came into existence within the auras of Freemasonic bodies. Most of these irregular groups were invented for the purpose of expanding the study of ancient philosophies and religions. Only a few of the most important of these orders survived their inventors. In some cases, these private fraternities created elaborate rituals and developed ambitions towards independent existence. The term clandestine or irregular have been applied by Masonic historians to these unauthorized or spurious rites. In most cases, these unorthodox groups were reabsorbed into the larger body of Masonic descent. The clandestine rites arose principally at a time when the boundaries of craft Masonic speculation were ill-defined. In the presence of reasonable doubt concerning orthodoxy, these irregular lodges were able to justify a number of pretensions and held considerable fascination for those dedicated to recondite speculations. Lacking internal vitality or dependent for their survival upon one or two dynamic intellectuals, these private societies lacked a general appeal and were limited in their sphere of influence to certain times and places. Freemasonry watched these irregular groups attentively, and as they faded out, their characters, certifications, diplomas, trestle boards, rituals, symbols, and related documents were withdrawn from public availability and stored in the archives of the European Grand Lodges. The principal motive for this procedure was to prevent further schisms from developing, based upon these high-sounding but mostly vacant documents. In addition to the groups arising within Masonry, there were a number of outside movements which attempted to attach themselves to the Masonic order for protection or for advancement of their own purposes. In some cases, these groups were drawn towards Freemasonry by overlapping memberships or parallel interest. In other instances, efforts were made to exploit Masonic influence for religious or political ends. Many of the clandestine rites were inspired by deficiencies within the body of the legitimate Masonic descent. Masonry made use of a variety of ancient religious and mystical symbols, and claimed, at least by implication, a participation in the esoteric traditions of antiquity, a subject of never-ending appeal. There were many high intimations, hints, and promises regarding the philosophical content and occult lore. After initiation, the new member was usually disappointed. His questions were left unanswered, and the rituals served to further confuse the already obscure symbolism. The new brother was not always impressed by the scholarship of his fellow members or the intellectual acquirements of the offices of his lodge. Instead of finding himself in the company of an order of supermen, he discovered that the brothers of the mystic tie were much like himself, confused and uncertain, and give to aimless discussion of unattainable abstractions. 18th century Europe was dominated by the Hermetic speculations which had intrigued the minds of the 17th century intelligentsia. Rosicrucianism, alchemy, Kabbalism, astrology, and magic and pagan mysteries had lost little of their earlier charm. Freemasonry came to be regarded as the legitimate descendant of the gold makers, the sorcerers, and the mystics. It was a day of dupes and disappointments, of large promises and small fulfillments. Pseudo-esoteric societies abounded, and frenzied dilettantes, seeking desperately for the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, and the secrets of universal wisdom, were initiated into fantastic rites, into societies that promised everything, collected a high fee, and bestowed nothing. One Rosicrucian order that flourished for a time in Italy presented a strangle cord to each of its initiates with the injunction, solemnly intoned, that the brother was to use this cord upon himself rather than reveal the esoteric and priceless secrets of the lodge. It is unlikely that any member was driven to this extremity, as he could take all of the degrees without learning anything worth concealing or revealing. Needless to say, about all he had to show for his original investment in time and money was an elaborate parchment covered with Kabbalistic designs and bearing the signatures, real or forged, of the right worshipful hierophants. These bogus organizations followed a systematic program of competitive pretension. Each was more elegant and more esoteric than the other, until the whole pattern reached the outermost circumference of the conceivable. At last, there was nothing further that could be presumed, presented, or previewed, and the enthusiasm burned itself out. In the last quarter of the century, the public mind, more and more disillusioned in its quest for mystic lore, settled down to the pressing problems of social revolution and representative government. Esoteric orders continued to exist, but they were reserved for the edification of small groups of thoughtful scholars, and little effort was made to attract public attention. Freemasonry gathered up the remnants and records of the earlier exacerbations, pronounced the clandestine rites to be extinct, and retired the magnificent vellum charges to the estate of literary curiosities. The condition in Germany was typical of that in the other countries. Secret societies of all kinds, religious, philosophical, political, and social, sprang up like mushrooms after a summer shower. Most of these organizations were short-lived and of limited membership, but the atmosphere of mystery which surrounded them was far-reaching in its consequences. Possibly the lack of political unity among the German states was responsible for the disorganization present among these fraternities. Each group included a few distinguished patrons, and a membership limited by the initiation fee to those in prosperous circumstances. Too many of these groups were catch-penny cults, founded by itinerant impostors who fled one community after another. By insisting upon the utmost secrecy, charlatans protected themselves from unfavorable publicity, thus ensuring a ready recipient in the next town. Most of the victims were too chagrined to publicize their own stupidity by exposing the frauds of which they had been the dupes. And of course, they could not reveal the true state of things without compromising other respectable or illustrious persons. So these disillusioned ex-members licked their wounds in private, or still hopeful of better fortune, cast their lot with another group making attractive pretensions. Leaf of a Masonic friendship book with drawings and writings in the autograph of Baron von Ecker und Eckhofen. The combination of Rosicrucian, Hermetic, and Kabbalistic symbols is indicative of the Baron's broad philosophic interest. The abbreviations and ciphers accompanying the signature prove his Masonic affiliation. In the Rosicrucian Society, he wrote under the name Magister Bianco. And his book, which you can see here, or The Rosicrucian in His Nakedness, is one of the first exposés of fraudulent secret societies. This rare and curious autograph occurs in the same album with that of Mozart. Take the case of the Baron Ecker und Eckhofen. He seems to have gotten himself involved with pseudo-Rosicrucian orders, which were doing a flourishing business in fees and special expenses. The Baron, in search of the master secrets of Kabbalism and alchemy, was lured on from grade to grade by fraudulent promises that the next degree would reveal all. At last he ascended to the top of the ritualistic ladder, only to find that this ladder ended in empty space. The supreme secret was that the simplest way to make gold was to finch it from the purses of the gullible. The good Baron took his disillusionment seriously, and under the name Magister Bianco, probably the one bestowed upon him by the societies, he wrote 2 scathing exposés of what he termed the Rosicrucian in his nakedness. He tells us that he himself and thousands like him, sincerely seeking wisdom, have been subjugated to the vilest possible imposture. He could think of nothing lower than the exploitation of man's spiritual aspirations. Yet even the Baron was a trifle dazed. There was so much of legendary and lore, so many beautiful symbols and solemn rituals, that it seemed impossible that all could be false. Somewhere the true wisdom of the ancients must have been preserved. There was nothing to do but seek further. So the Baron continued his search, the results of which, unhappily, have not been recorded. Baron Ecker ut Eckhofen seems to have been a chronic joiner, interested in Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, and Illuminism. Always he was disappointed. He sought substance and found only a shadow. Everywhere there were the deep and mysterious hints, and traveling rapidly under the surface of the intellectual class, they gained new color and probably en route. Everyone knew of someone else who had attained the magnum opus. And these legends kept hope alive. Each new society that sprang up was created apparently to rescue frustrated metaphysicians from their deep-seated dilemmas. Central Europe was set already in that introversion which 150 years later was to involve the world in 2 great wars. There was too much daydreaming and imagining, and too few opportunities for the human mind to develop along normal and natural lines. Regardless of the motives which brought them into being, the secret societies of that time nearly always broke up on political rocks. As soon as a group gained an influential membership, it was invaded by fanatics determined to direct its resources to the fulfillment of their own particular program. These fanatics were either extreme liberals seeking to rescue Germany, Europe, and the whole world from the insidious machinery of the state and church, or else extreme conservatives resolved to protect the state and church from the rising tide of philosophical realism and political anarchy. In the resulting confusion, the philosophical aims of the organizations, if any, were quickly submerged. Among these secret groups, there were some whose purposes were entirely sincere. Often they were forced to glamorize their objectives in order to compete successfully with the fraudulent lodges. Almost any subject, from chemistry to botany, and from legal reforms to literary criticism, required a secret society for its very existence. It was impossible to sit down and discuss Boethius, Boheme, or Bacon without the paraphernalia of red plush curtains, high altars, mystic grips, and secret passwords. A humorous work was published ridiculing this fashion. It showed how the members of a certain circle had to pass through an elaborate series of contortions, including darkened chambers and fiery ordeals, in order to assemble for a quiet dinner of potted chicken. In our files is the complete set of documentations relating to a pseudo-Masonic rite, elegant but of short duration, which flourished in France in the closing years of the 18th century, under the intriguing title, The Rites of Zoroaster of the Eons. It is a good example of the general situation. This collection of curiosities include 2 large vellums, written in cipher and ornamented with curious designs. Needless to say, a secret society has no standing unless it had its own cipher. Most of the ciphers were ridiculously simple and therefore most appropriate for the quality of material they were intended to conceal. The burden of the secret papers of the Rite of Zoroaster of the Eons is that the degrees are of extraordinary antiquity, incredible profundity, superlative excellence, and sublime import. With the mysterious parchments to back it up, this rite could be revived today with considerable financial profit. Very few would have the presumption to ask embarrassing questions as to who was responsible for the vellums. From the foregoing, it is not difficult to understand why it came about that in 1782 a Masonic Congress was convened at Williamsbad under the presidency of the Duke of Brunswick to end the discord among the various groups of German Freemasons and related orders. This conference was concerned partly with the discovery of the secrets of the higher degrees of Freemasonry, which several Grand Lodges claimed to possess, but were unable to produce. Although it settled the point as to whether Masonry was to be considered a continuation of the Order of the Templars by a negative vote after 30 sittings, very little of actual value was accomplished. The secret of the higher degrees were not discovered. Thank you for watching. I will have part 3 up as soon as possible. Please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating a little to Wars of the Rosies through PayPal or Patreon. The links are in the description. Thank you very much.